man who governed the area which was conquered by the Greek army as they pushed westward. Generally, he was regarded as a very liberal and civilized man. There were murders occasionally of Turks who had come under Greek rule by some military units. There was no organized mass killing by the Greek army, as there had been on the Turkish side, of the minority population or of the occupied population. And occasionally Sturgias also executed Greeks who carried out murders of Turks. But there was a certain amount of confusion and unruliness by the Greek army, especially as it was retreating from areas in which they did kill civilians. In fact, there were, in the Yalova Peninsula, there were murders. All of this is outlined, incidentally, in the book, or is described in the book. There were murders and even small-scale massacres, but we're talking about, the difference between 100 and 1. In other words, for every one dead Turk killed, massacred by Greeks, there were 100 Christians. That's more or less the proportions. Massacred by Turks. So, in short, I would say the occupation by the Greek army of the area from Izmir towards the outskirts of Ankara, there was a war. There were occasional massacres by units. Some Greek troops were actually punished for massacres, but there was vengefulness. There was a guerrilla war also, in which Greek supply trucks were ambushed and their drivers were murdered by local Turks, and then the friends of the driver would kill a couple of Turks. This is what happened, but not on anything like the scale of what was happening or the organization of what was happening by the Turks in the areas the Turks Ataturk controlled, or the areas he then took back as he advanced towards Smyrna, which he captured, Izmir, in September 1922. When he drove the Greek army out of Asia Minor. Yeah.
So you want to talk also a little bit about what happened in the Balkans to the Muslims?
We didn't. This wasn't really the subject we investigated, but there were massacres there, mutual massacres in the Balkans, certainly from the 1820s. The Turks had occupied the Balkans during the 15th, 16th centuries. Basically oppressed the Christian population, and occasionally the Christian population rose in revolt. The most famous and most important of the revolts leading to modern times was the revolt of the Greeks against the Turks in the 1820s, when Greece attained independence from Turkey. Ultimately, they won in the rebellion. In that rebellion, there were massacres of Turks by Greeks, and there were also massacres by Turks. There were massacres by Greeks of Turks, and there were massacres by Turks of Greece during the Civil War. There were continuous wars between the Christian populations in the Balkans, Bulgarians, Serbs, and so on, during the following decades. There were massacres of Turks occasionally by Bulgarians also, but more famously and much larger were the massacres by the Turks, who were much stronger, essentially, than the Balkan small peoples and powers there. They were much larger than what the Christians were doing to the Turks. And then there were the Balkan Wars in 1912, 1913, which preceded World War I, in which essentially the Balkan Christians managed to wrest certain territories, parts of Bulgaria, Romania, and the areas there, what's called today Macedonia, North Macedonia. They managed to wrest these territories away from the Ottomans. The Ottomans were essentially defeated in the Balkan Wars. And there were probably there was both mutual massacre and expulsion of Muslims to Asia Minor. And these are the Muhajirs we're talking about, to then take revenge against Christians in Asia Minor, and of course occupy the Christian victims' houses. This is in short, but this isn't something we investigated. We limited ourselves to this period and didn't look much beyond the Dirne northwards about what happened. It's very complex, very confusing. There's lots of different peoples there. It's beyond the realm of this study, essentially. Yeah.
Historians of the Nazi Holocaust point out the key importance, I'm thinking of people like Lucy Davidowitz, point out the key importance of legislative Nazi campaigns. I mean, to make it legal to confiscate property, to define exactly what a Jew is. If you were 1/16 of a Jew, you were a Jew, and so on. Were the Turks, the Ottoman Empire, a sophisticated in their legal infrastructure as the Nazis were?
The Ottomans were very legally minded. I don't remember them ever issuing any edict or law defining what was a Turk and what was a non-Turk, guy or a Christian, but they did issue a number of edicts, essentially, towards confiscation. That is, the legality of confiscating the Christians, those Christians who become victims and been driven out of their houses, to take their property. There's confiscatory edicts were issued regarding property, probably to ward off the theft of property by individuals rather than the state getting the property. In the Turkish press, quite often Christians were described as bugs, as bacteria, etc., more or less in the same fashion as Jews were described in Nazi literature and in the Nazi press, in order to justify and to persuade the masses to do what they did in each of the bouts of massacre. So there was not, this isn't an official definition by the law, by the legislatures of the sultans of Turkey, of the Christians, but informally this is what was said to the people through the press, and the press was very widespread in Turkey. Yeah.
So the Christians were mistreated by the Muslim Turks. The Muslim
Mistreated
Turks
is a sort of
treated
understatement.
Christians badly.
Sorry?
Muslim Turks treated Christians badly by kidnapping the women and children and converting them to Islam. Just like it reminds me of assimilation in some way. Like the French assimilated some local cultures in Africa and replaced it with French culture.
I don't know the history of North Africa sufficiently. Let me say one thing though. I don't remember seeing any case of Christians in areas they had occupied, either in the Balkans or in Asia Minor, forcibly converting Muslims to Christianity. That never happened. What happened is
the Muslims converted the Christians to Islam.
yes, what I'm saying is the opposite didn't occur as far as I know anywhere.
I'm not talking about the opposite. But
No, but I'm just making a point.
did the Muslims, the Turks treat the Germans were Christians. The Turks and the Germans were against each other, right?
When in World War I they were allies.
They were allies.
Yes.
I'm just saying during this genocide, the genocide.
During most of this period, 1894 to 1924, the Germans were in alliance or sympathetic with the Turks,
They were
and adulated, in fact, Ataturk, for example, during the 20s and
never
30s.
treated the Germans badly. They only did that to the Christians because they thought Christians were threats.
Well, the Germans weren't under Turkish domination, so they couldn't do anything to the Germans. They were dealing with their Christian minorities.
I got a question.
Sorry, yeah.
Actually, it was interesting how you made a comparison between the Christian genocide and the Holocaust. So I'm going to go with that and ask you, so there are cases of when Christians helped Jews in the Holocaust, and of course the cases of them not helping Jews. Were there cases that you've encountered in your research of Jews helping or not helping the Christians in this prolonged genocide or destruction?
The Jewish role in what happened during this 30-year genocide by Turks of Christians is interesting. There were very few Jews in Asia Minor and Constantinople during this period. We're talking about several tens of thousands altogether. And this is probably the reason the Turks did not kill or expel the Jews, because they were insignificant. The Christians were a threat, were seen as a threat, were allied, if you like, in their minds to the Christian powers outside, which were predatory vis-a-vis Turkey, but the Jews were insignificant. So they didn't do anything to them, though this was in some ways raised, the subject was raised by various consuls, how come they're not doing anything to the Jews? But in the consular reports, we do see the Jews occasionally appearing. In some consular reports, the Jews are reported, I think in the town of Urfa, for example, during 1894-96, the Jews are mobilized, the small Jewish minority in Urfa is mobilized by the Turkish authorities to clear away the bodies of Christians now just slaughtered. In In other words, in Urfa, the church of Urfa, some 3, 4, 5,000 Christians are murdered in that church in 1 or 2 days. And then the Turks mobilized the Jews to cart away the ashes and the remains of the Jews to take them to, of the Christians to take them away to burial, because this would be, sacrilege in some way for the Muslims to handle these bodies which are now impure of Christians. And so we see the Jews appearing in that role occasionally. Once in a while also, Jews are mentioned in exploiting the situation of Christian abandonment of property to also lay hold of Christian properties, as in Smyrna, for example. I seem to remember that occurring in consular reports. But the consuls also, many of them at least, were anti-Semitic. They had you could feel it, and you can see it in the writings, that they don't have any great sympathy for the Jews, though usually they have sympathy for the Christians. So I would take much of, or some of what some of the consuls say about the Jews with a grain of salt. That's my impression.
Any other questions? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Today, we can see Turkish government's behavior on Kurds, which now is not a religious difference, but now an ethnic. Is this a continuation of the original plan of the Young Turks of going not only just religious difference, but also an ethnic mindset?
Well, it's sort of interesting, this paradoxical, this reversal of the Kurdish role in all of this. The Kurds, by and large, some save Christians, incidentally, in certain areas like Sassoon, but the Dersim, but in most areas the Kurds are serving Ottoman and CUP purposes and massacring Christians on behalf of the government. But more or less simultaneously with that, and during World War I, there were also expulsions of Kurds from certain areas by the CUP. In other words, it occurs more or less simultaneously. They first use the Kurds to clear out Christians, and then they say, well, these Kurds are not exactly Turks. As you say, there's a nationalist ethos among the Turks, and the Kurds don't fit into this because they speak their own language, even though they are Muslims, and they clear out Kurds from certain areas. And this has been going on ever since World War I. That there's bouts of Kurdish rebelliousness and oppression by the Turkish government, successive Turkish governments, Ataturk and even today under Erdogan. It's an interesting story, the Kurdish story, because they are both perpetrators and victims, almost simultaneously.
There was a question here.
Yeah, but was there any kind of anti-persecution kind of ideology or movement or anything within Turkey, in all the three regimes?
Well, I sort of mentioned it. Occasionally there are local notables, Muslim notables, even occasionally one or two muftis, that is religious Muslim authorities, who protest. And, for example, in Trebizond, during the war, during World War I, in Trebizond, there's appeals to the local commander, Nuruddin, by Trebizond notables, Muslim notables. Well, if you were killing the menfolk, we can understand that, Christian menfolk, Greek menfolk, but you shouldn't be doing this. This is actually not World War I, this is 1923, but you shouldn't do this to women and children. That's not Islamic, or that's not allowed by the Quran, etc. And Nuruddin basically tells them to shut up, otherwise we're going to punish you as well. It's a dictatorship, and it's, they're quite harsh, the Kemalist authorities, so they basically shut up. But there are occasional protests by people, and as I say, there are some officials during 1915, 1916 who do resign, and one or two are even executed by, but generally the local population goes along with what's happening, often participates in the deportations and killings and rapes, etc., and usually manages to make some bucks out of this by exploiting the situation and gaining property, abandoned Christian property.
How hard is the dictatorship working in terms of propagating its ideology in print? Is it just?
No. It's they use the press. We looked at. I don't read Turkish, but my co-author is a Turkish expert. But in the consular reports from Turkey, they often included translations of clippings from Turkish newspapers to tell Washington or London what was happening and what was being printed in the press, and therefore how they were trying to influence public opinion, the authorities vis-a-vis the Turkish Muslim population. And they made massive use of the press in propaganda, if you like, in some way, maybe not as sophisticated, but in the same way as the Germans did with their press in Germany. Yeah.
And there seems to be a trend throughout history that when there's destabilization in a Christian minority or non-Muslim minority, that population somehow systemically gets attacked. And most recently, I know you talked about a little bit about ISIS, and our previous administration really encouraged this Arab Spring that essentially led to hundreds of thousands of Christian minorities being persecuted. And do you see any parallels between what's happened recently and over 100 years ago?
Well, the major parallel is there's a de-Christianization of the Middle East. That's what's been happening in the last almost 200 years. Starting, I would say, as I said, in 1860. Gradually, slowly, the Muslim societies amid which the Christian minorities live have been pushing them out. In recent years, this has become more pronounced under ISIS and Al-Qaeda, etc., who simply murder and burn churches or whatever. And Iraq and Syria have emptied of Christians, essentially, or almost completely. There's also persecution by Muslim neighbors of the large Christian minority, the largest Christian minority in the Middle East, the Copts in Egypt. And Palestine itself also has seen de-Christianization. Even though Israel rules, Palestine has been ruling since '67, gradually Christians have been drifting off where they can to Canada, to America, wherever, because they feel themselves caught between the Israelis and the Muslim Palestinian population. Bethlehem, which was a largely Christian town in the past, is today 35% Christian, 65% Muslim. So Christians are leaving. They're also multiplying smaller numbers than Muslims in terms of birth rates. That's also affecting this as well. But essentially, the Christians have been steadily driven out of the Middle East by the Turks, by Arabs, by you name it, since 1860. This has been a process.
One last question, okay? One last question. Well, since you already asked this, somebody, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sure that the words can also stay a little behind.
So what do you think is the primary driving force behind the denial of these genocides? Like, what is there to gain here?
I think that's a good question, and I've thought about that, and I'm not sure I have an answer. But what I'd say is there is a question of pride, of national pride. To be identified as genociders, as people who've killed millions of people, and that's what happened literally, they don't like it. They don't like to be identified as such. It didn't happen. It's somebody else's fault. It's propaganda by the West against us Muslims, us Turks, yeah. I think that's the main thing. You could also say there may be a legal aspect to the whole thing, in the sense that if you start agreeing that what did Germany do? Once it accepted that they'd done what they'd done to the Jews, they ended up paying also a lot of money to Israel and to individual Jews who suffered enormous economic loss as a result of what happened. And then Armenians and Greeks and the Syrians could now turn around and say, if the Turks admitted to doing what I just said they've done, they have done, they could be sued. The state could be sued and could end up being, under a legal attack, which would result in a lot of money being lost. This could be part of the calculus as well. But it's not just pride, it's also, if a nation is thus sort of described and understood to have acted, there's a sort of repulsion from it, commercial deals and investments, and politically. So there would be a great cost. I think that's what Erdogan understands.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
But it's a yes.
So,